Hi, this is the cavnessHR Culture Podcast, and I'm your host, Daniela Young. Our guest today is Jonathan Mills. Jonathan, are you ready to be great today?
I am ready.
Jonathan Mills is the founder of Corporate Culture Specialist, an organizational culture strategist and agile change expert. Formerly, Jonathan was an IT process and automation developer for clients at the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice. He leverages the connection between process design and meaningful purpose. The apex result is values-based culture strategies and agile implementation, delivering iterative, short-term wins that lead to lasting change. Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much, Danielle.
Can you tell me a little bit about something that you're working on these days that's super exciting to you?
Okay, yes. So I personally am a millennial. I'll call myself an elder millennial, right? It allows me to get along with older generations. And it's typical to have, a very hot or cold relationship with the millennial generation. I found people worship or despise them. But it's a new generation coming into the workplace with a unique set of values and perspectives because of all this new technology that we have, because of the access to information we've had since we were young. And the workplace isn't really figuring out how to adapt to those changes yet. But there's this great opportunity if we figure out how to connect with the millennial generation to revolutionize the way that work is done and push the envelope on meaningful culture and healthy culture. So what I'm working on right now is putting together some best practices and guidance for organizations to, first of all, understand millennials on a healthy level, right? We're not going to worship them and we're not going to hate them. We're going to understand them because it's not another species. They're like any other generation. They've just been rung through a different set of circumstances. So if I can help organizations understand millennials first, then I can also help those organizations figure out how to connect with those millennials. All right. So I'm doing some original research around what it is, culturally speaking, that millennials are looking for in the workplace. And it's not all of what you assume it's going to be. But if we understand that, there are practical steps that can be taken. So as I'm doing that research, I'm figuring out, connecting the dots, identifying some brass tacks actions and behaviors and policies that organizations should be considering that will improve the way that they're able to connect with millennials and harness all of that energy and creativity and productivity, while also teaching millennials a thing or two about how past generations have learned over time and all this great experience that they have. So it's this two-directional relationship that I'm hoping to help build.
Yes, perfect. Like all relationships, right? Two-directional. So I was going to tell you, Jonathan, and of course, any of our listeners, on Netflix, there's a fantastic comedy special called Elder Millennial.
Oh, I've seen that.
Eliza Schlesinger. She's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, and I do think, elder millennials, I'm a right in the middle millennial, but I had the same experience that you probably had of analog childhood, digital, teenage, and then adulthood, which is kind of what separates the elder millennials from the younger millennials. But something else that you mentioned is that, people worship or despise millennials. And I talk about this a lot in my culture research, that there really is too much emphasis sometimes on black and white, good or bad, and nothing in life is that simple. So for every downside that older generations might think that millennials bring to the workplace, of course they bring huge potential and many, many other things as well, which is exactly what you've tapped into.
Yes. Well, I think, Daniela, that a lot of this a lot of an organization's ability, leaders' ability, managers' ability to connect with millennials meaningfully, and for helping millennials be productive members of organizations, because they aren't always, is to change our frame of mind and change our approach to how we are thinking about new employees and new generations. Because the differences between generations, the things that seem black and white, are really just kind of an illusion to what's going on. The real meat is in the intrinsic needs that the human species has, right? And recognizing millennials, again, are not another species. They're just people who have gone through some different circumstances, some different paradigms, and are reacting to the world that they have lived in. But the things that will help millennials adapt to the world and help the world adapt to millennials, especially in the workplace, are the same things that are going to help baby boomers and Gen X and the silent generation and the greatest generation have a more fulfilling work life themselves. Because we're looking at human needs and human motivation, and we're learning to think about and treat organizational culture scientifically and systematically, right? And the better we get at that, the healthier our environment's going to be for all the generations. So paying attention to millennials and treating millennials, learning about them, is a gateway to improving circumstances for all of us. Because again, this is a generational, question, and it seems like a generational problem, but it's really not. It's really just a human problem. And figuring out how do we get from who we've been in the past, culturally and organizationally, and move into a better future, evolve, if you will. How do we evolve forward?
For sure. And, cultural evolution benefits everybody, just like you said. So we're, being pushed into a completely different world right now with culture. Everyone knows this is going on. Back in 2014, culture was the word of the year. I particularly love, every time I've talked with you, how you are bringing this data focus and this technology focus and this, all of this much more, established business-like strategies to the field of culture, which is still kind of seen as a bit touchy-feely, a bit if I have time for it, the lax strategy that people build. Yeah. And of course, you and I both know that it pretty much needs to be the other way around. You pretty much need to start with a map for your culture, and then you're going to see your profits increase and your business increase. Jonathan, I wanted to ask you to explain for our listeners. So the first time we spoke, I knew I just loved Jonathan and the way he thinks, because he said something about an employee market, specifically with regards to hiring. And I thought that was such a powerful image, because we can all think of, a buyer's market or a seller's market. Anyone who's lived through the housing crisis knows exactly what that means. And so the idea of employee market is very intriguing. And of course, it has a lot to do with, as you were already talking about, a shift in generations, a shift in culture, a shift in technology, and everything that we're seeing coming together. So tell us more about that.
Sure. So it's common knowledge now, right? The job market's doing pretty well, right? Unemployment is low. It's very low, under 4% still. And, what that means is that positions are on the side of not being filled enough. There are more job candidates, relatively, than there are, sorry, let me rephrase that. There are more openings. There are more positions available than there are people to fill them. And calling it an employee's market is really just a way of saying employees have control over the hiring process a lot more than they have in the past. And we're shifting from a paradigm of seeing organizations and hiring managers as the people who can, decide whether or not to accept an employee, right? And employees come with their resumes and they sit in chairs and they wait for an interview, and they're really hopeful and they're really nervous about getting that job. Well, the nervousness has shifted. And now hiring managers are the ones experiencing more stress because employees can choose to turn down a job. Most specifically in certain industries like IT is a good example, but largely across the board, that's true. So if we want to go back to the generational question about millennials, you have all these millennials who are now in an age group that is finishing or just finished college, and they're about to turn 40, right? 38 is the oldest millennial. This group of crazies has power over whether or not your position gets filled at your company, right? On top of that, the median tenure for a millennial is 2 years. And they don't feel like that's a problem. They don't feel like that's disloyal or inappropriate. They're typical millennials thinking, oh, after 10 years, yeah, I'm ready for something different. I don't feel like I need to be loyal to this employer. That's not how they think. So if employers don't figure out how to connect with millennials and how to evolve their own approach to the workforce, then it's going to be a big problem, right? Because this paradigm that millennials are bringing in is only going to get more severe. I mean, if the millennial generation is odd, how do you think the Gen Y is going to behave? And the next generation, right? My daughters think it's totally normal to be able to ask for whatever movie or TV show they want to watch on demand, and mom and dad will try and find it. That's not how I was, how I grew up. That's new. But tremendous access to information is completely normal to the younger generation. So this paradigm shift away from long-term career is going to increase until we have some other, reaction from a future generation or change in government or change in technology.
Right. And, it's so interesting what you're saying about, a paradigm shift. Like, it really is. Our culture is changing completely. And of course that affects the workplace. And it used to be that employers had more power. If you wanted a job, you paid your dues, you hung it out for years, you retired in 20 or 30 years with the gold watch, etc. Now you have the complete flip side. Not only do millennials not want to stay around for long periods of time, but they don't even necessarily want to work the job for the big bucks. I saw this research saying that millennials are actually shaping up to be the most philanthropic generation in recorded history.
Yeah.
Contrary to this kind of idea of self-centered, it's, millennials jump around so much because they want to feel fulfilled, because they want to feel like they're giving back. And more we're starting to see how, they're willing to turn down a job for 80 grand to take a job at a startup for 35K and some equity.
Yeah.
Hopes that they're kind of making a difference. So that's so interesting. I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It gets me thinking, these classic reward systems are a really good example of something that needs to shift. The increase in pay as you go thinking has to shift.
For sure. And also, I remember my train of thought. Okay. What I was going to say was even leadership development, or this idea that, there tends to be this idea that millennials want everything too quickly and they don't want to pay their dues. I kind of disagree with that. I would be interested to hear your perspective. I don't think it's that they don't want to pay their dues. It's that they want to be able to see a clear path to how it's connecting to their future. So, my example is kind of interesting from the military. Out of the several thousand lieutenants that commissions every year, less than 10% of them are going to make general 30 years down the road. And there's no way, they haven't found any way to predict which one of those are going to be. So they have, on one hand, they have these very great leadership development programs. Everyone gets leadership development from their first year. And I really want to see more of that in the in the civilian world. But the flip side was like, I was constantly told that I had to spend 7 years just at some random position, dead end kind of job, in order to then at the rank of major be able to apply to this job, which would have had nothing to do with what I was doing before.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't make sense to me. And that's part of what made me want to leave, where, I was perfectly happy to be in the low level role, but I wanted to see a connection. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that it's not that millennials don't want to wait or they want the leadership positions right away. It's we want to get in there and we want to develop ourselves. What do you think about that?
What you're talking about sounds a lot like line of sight.
Say more about that.
This idea that if you're doing something, you want to be able to see the purpose behind it. And I can resonate with that. I mean, I think there is definitely some impatience. Sure. There's definitely this high expectation. On the flip side, there's also some artificial systems of approaching employment where you are an entry-level job and suddenly you're a less respectable person. It's like you're the entry person, so we don't have to respect you. And that's the culture that millennials are coming into. So of course they react to it. They respond to that by saying, no, I am respectable and I deserve respect and trust and a chance to be creative and all these things, right? But the way of dealing with that difference in thinking is the same thing that all these other generations need, which is a straight or at least a visible line between what they're doing day to day and some worthwhile cause, right? Because paying someone a paycheck is it's enough to take care of their hygiene needs. But after your hygiene needs have been met, money is a very poor motivator. It kind of stinks at actually motivating people or getting them to be creative or innovative. Or energetic. And you need to connect them with purpose, and you need to give them autonomy, and you need to give them opportunities to master their craft. I believe that millennials really, they're quicker to recognize that those are things they're looking for. A lot of other folks that have been in the workplace for a long time have been taught that is not normal. That you shouldn't care about having a purpose at work, and you shouldn't care about having control over your own actions, and you shouldn't care about, being able to master everything that you do. You just need to do what you're told and stay in the lines. And over time, with seniority, you'll make more money, and that's your reward, right? And it's working towards retirement.
Absolutely.
That's the mentality.
And I so resonate with the respect thing too that you talked about. And I think for everyone listening, that's probably one of the key points of value that Jonathan just dropped on us here, and I personally will never forget, again, I was a lieutenant in the Army, and you're treated like the entry-level straight out of college person that you are, which generally still tends to correlate with not very respected. And of course, you have to earn respect and trust, but there's such a great moment. I had a leader who came in and from the beginning said, look, I trust you. I respect you. You're an officer in the Army. You got this job. You have my trust. The only thing you can do is lose it. And every leader I know is dedicated to this man.
Wow.
Because he came in that way.
Yeah.
And, I would love to, of course, see this more and more and more. Jonathan, I do want to ask you to talk to us a little bit more about the research that you've done, because you have done some original research. You have a workshop now that you're offering. So tell us more about that.
Yes. So, of course, I start with well-established, validated sources, right? We're looking at Pew Research and a few other sources, Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, looking at what's going on in the marketplace. And it's readily accessible data to everyone. If you're not looking at it and you have employees, you need to look at it. But, I am using a culture framework that also is highly validated and reliable. But there's not a lot of research using that framework. So I've deployed that, um, asking employees very specific questions about their cultural experience at work and what it is that they are looking for in a job and in a workplace, specifically targeting millennials. Um, and that framework is so strong and clear that I can draw actions from it, right? We can describe specific behaviors from that framework, not to the extent of giving someone a turnkey culture. There's no such thing as turnkey culture, but with a little bit of knowledge and the ability to frame the discussion properly, you can make decisions wisely. And that's where it really comes in, right? Is knowing that you have to make a choice between, some set of policies, or you need to deal with a problem. You're not sure how. You've got to decide how. Are you going to follow industry norms? Are you going to do what your neighboring company did? Or are you going to look a little deeper and process your decision through some wise framework? And that's what my research is centered around, is getting some feedback from millennials using this framework so that we can make some really smart decisions also within that framework. So culture is this crazy nebulous thing. But if we have a really great foundation, we have a really great frame for having this discussion, then we can actually see, point A to point B in the context of culture. You can actually, determine what are we going to influence with the choice we make. And you can measure that over time. You can look back at it. You can benchmark, right? You're never going to capture the whole subject of culture in one fell swoop, but you can be productive about it.
Absolutely. There's this definition of culture that I really like, which is an index of every interaction that goes on in your company. And I like that definition because it shows you the immensity of there's no easy button, there's no quick fix.
Yeah.
But I love the focus on having a framework, having a strategy. And, for our listeners, Jonathan and I are both culture consultants, right? Mm-hmm. This is what we do. And it is one of those things that's interesting because people think of culture as human interactions, which is what it is, which means everyone thinks that they know how to do it. But, for many of the business owners, small business owners that are listeners, if you haven't hired an advisor, specifically a culture advisor in the past, it's an interesting thing to think about, that you as the business owner have to focus on everything. So of course it makes sense to bring in a sales advisor when you're putting together your sales strategy, a marketing advisor when you're putting together your marketing strategy, and a culture advisor, someone like Jonathan Mills, who this is all he does, is study this, is read the Pew Research findings, is be able to underline exact tactics that you can use to create these frameworks in your company. So just wonderful. Jonathan, this zoomed by. I want to ask you, what is the best way for our listeners to connect with you on social media?
So you can always visit me on Facebook. Do you want me to spell out the address? Or do you want to provide that?
All of your social media links will be in the show notes. Okay. But how do they find you on Facebook?
You can connect me. You can connect to me on my company page on Facebook, LinkedIn, of course. Just go to my website, culturespecialist.com. I'm always open for a phone call. I love this subject enough that I will, have a conversation with you about what you're going through, right? And there's value in that for me too, if only for the fascination, right? To help you kind of get started on that process.
Absolutely. Everyone's got to get started somewhere, right?
Yeah,
And of course,
yeah.
as a culture specialist, Jonathan will ask you questions and listen to you and really do a customizable approach to your culture.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jonathan, we are at time. Just want to remind everyone that all of the links will be available on the cavnessHR website, which is www.cavnesshrblog.com. This video will be available on YouTube and, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. Please share with your friends. Thank you, and remember to be great every day.